Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Welcome back, everybody. The number 3 is so important in many different ways, especially when it comes to storytelling and even visuals, the rule of thirds. Why is the number 3 so impactful? Why should we be mindful of that in crafting our communication and our stories? We are going to dig deep into that. And I'm going to be fully honest. I've always known it works, but I'm not really sure why. She does. She is a storytelling coach and also a screenwriter, helps people all the time with their communication, improve their stories. And by the way, there's a story in everything. Even your resume tells a story. She is Michelle Cutler. She's back with us. Hey, Michelle, how you doing?
I'm really well. Thank you.
I've always known number 3 to be important when you're presenting views, stories, even communication. I'm not really sure. Honestly, I don't know why it works. I don't know. Where do we begin with this today?
Well, it's funny. Okay, let's say it's funny because comedy is one of the best places to find this rule of 3. Many jokes are set up with 3 stock characters, a priest, a rabbi, and a horse walk into a bar. You already know that there's going to be some comedy in there because the horse is what makes it funny, right? The third element, if you only have a first and a second element, you don't know yet what makes it funny. But once you have this third element, it's like the twist, then suddenly you see some potential for humor, right? And you can also say, like in the example of drama or horror or anything that you're trying to set up tension, usually it's the third incident or the third event that something becomes meaningful or an obstacle or a hook. Because the first time something happens is just a one-off, it's a moment in time. The second is like, oh, is that a coincidence? Maybe that's, it doesn't really mean anything yet. But on the third event, the third sighting, the third time you hear the voice in the wall, you start to think, maybe this is a pattern, right? It takes the third element to make a pattern. It takes the third leg for a tripod, for a table. Something doesn't really stand up on 2 legs. Usually it takes a third leg. So there are lots of elements in space and in our life experiences. Like physical space and life experiences that actually depend on this trio, triptych, triad, trifecta, all of these 3 elements that hold something together, like the judiciary, executive, and the congressional branch of government. Supposedly.
Let's not go there. I never thought of it that way. A table cannot stand on 2 legs. So you need the third. And also I'm seeing a little bit more here in your explanation, which by the way was excellent, that you can't have a comparison or an angle when it's only 2. You need the third. And even when you give a list, somebody gives you a list of things, it's always better with 3, but I guess that's the same situation because it gives you the dynamics. It gives you more to work with. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And actually, you just made me think of something. We even look at like a 3-course meal as like the sort of standard of a meal. You have an entree, an appetizer, you have your main course, you have a dessert or something to that effect. You have 3 act structures usually, in drama. Although now, when they started to put in commercial breaks, you could say, okay, it's a 5-act structure, but it's usually those 3 acts in the middle that are the real storytelling, and the first and the final. Like the first is the the teaser, and the final is, the button or the punchline or something to that effect, or the hook into the next episode. So there's something about this 3, the tripling. You see it in Shakespeare, you see it in political speeches. And once you start to notice it, then you really start to notice it.
I've often heard too that when it's 3, our brains are better equipped to process the information. And I don't know how that happens, but maybe it seems complete. There's a balance where you can't have that when it's only 2.
Well, you mentioned earlier having it when you said a different angle. I started to think literally, like in geometry, having an angle. It's been a long time since I've done geometry, but I immediately started to see just a triangle, or even this. Otherwise, it's just a 90-degree. It's an angle. Anything two lines can make an angle, of course, but I think the third line is what unifies it. The third line is what fixes it in space. Like when you used to use those protractors in school, when you had to make like it had the needle on one side, the point, and the pencil on the other, and you could open it to varying degrees to make your little geometry drawings. It's the third line that fixes the angle, fixes the shape. Otherwise, those two lines can just open and close sort of infinitely. I'm really making that up on the spot. That is something that literally just came to me as we were talking. So I don't know if that works visually in your mind, but I can see it.
Well, I find it very interesting in that 3 is such a powerful number, especially if you look at manifestation. Nikola Tesla, I believe, and I've been studying this in him, king of manifestation. He manifested what he wanted, his experiments, and they came to fruition. Everything he did, and he was huge in terms of energy, electric. I mean, some say he created the electric motor. Some say he created electricity or discovered it. He was working with Edison, and some say that Edison stole his concepts. But everything he did was 3, in 3s, and every formula had to be divisible by 3. I'm just sharing it. I find it interesting. We're talking about 3, and that's what he was all about. And there are some that call it the 3-6-9 principle of how he worked. If you study it, it comes back to 3. So there's something there.
That's really interesting. That's interesting. I also like this idea of a lot of times we say, okay, on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. Like if someone said, okay, on the count of 2, you would say 1, 2, and then you would kind of pause and wait. Like you wouldn't necessarily go on the count of 2. Even when musicians, like drummers, count off before they're playing, 1, 2, 3. Well, maybe it's 4 because usually it's a 4/4 time signature. But it could be a 3, a 3/4 time signature, and you count off in 3. A lot of songs are built under the 3 verses construct.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's because you have a beginning. I mean, it's super generic to say, but you really have a beginning where you set up the world, you set up the characters, you set up the stakes, right? You have a middle, which ends up being the quest, the journey, highs and lows and everything, but it's still the middle. And then you have the end, which is the third act, which, things come to culminate and come to a climax. And then, finish with resolution, unless there's a sequel, or if it's a trilogy, of course. If it's a trilogy, you're going to have, a ... at the end of your first series, your first installment or your first episode. So, again, like we're doing, as soon as you start to pay attention, you can really find it in so many places. And, when you're communicating, it does have an impact when you set up an event, whatever it is and whatever subject you're speaking about, and they see it as happening a certain way, but they don't know yet that it's typical or unusual unless you cue it, unless you tell them. But the second time they see it, and it's the same as the first time, you establish it's the standard way that things happen. So that the third time the event happens and it's different, they know instinctively that's a deviation from the norm without you having to explain it to them, right? So it's a very nice way to not have to use exposition all the time, or when people say, show it, don't tell it, right? Like, show me it's odd. Don't tell me it's odd. And that's a good way to do that.
So I'm going to potentially throw a proverbial monkey wrench into the 3 theory.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it said that when it's a group of 3 people, that it's often said that 3's a crowd, meaning we don't, we
Yeah.
don't, or how about this? You have a couple and there's somebody else, and that
Mhm.
somebody else can be referred to as the third wheel, which is not
Mhm.
looked at in a positive light.
Mhm.
isn't
Mhm.
it interesting? We're talking about the benefits of the rule of threes, but then you look at it in a different way when it's groups of people.
Right. Like
Maybe
a
not the
social
same.
dynamic. Yeah, the
Yes.
social dynamic is funny because, um, if you think about childhood, like playground, sandbox situations, um, when you have two best, so one person on their own cannot be a best friend, cannot be or have a best friend. One person on their own is just a person.
Yep.
You have a second person and they become best friends, and everything between them, they have their codes, they have their memories, that they're creating as they play, they have their communication, their toys and their games. And then all it takes is the new kid in school, or even if you look at like To Kill a Mockingbird, for example, when Dill comes for the summer and he changes the whole story for the two other kids, the brother and sister, because he's an outsider and he's bringing this third element to what is their normalcy, right? So if I'm with my best friend and a third friend comes along, unless we're just the most harmonious people in the world, there's always a bit of like, are you competition? Are we friends? Do we share the same jokes? Did you go where for the summer? Um, it's suddenly a trio is just not as fun. I mean, it can be fun, but there always seems to be a bit of conflict.
So, how about some examples of three working really well, or not, or maybe not working well?
Well, I think you could look at, well, okay, that's funny. So you could say the band Nirvana was a very successful trio, right? One of a huge successful band as a trio.
Hmm.
But when you know more about Kurt Cobain, or when they looked at his journals, um, what's his name? Bob Grohl, Dave Grohl. Dave Grohl was the drummer at the time, right, of Nirvana. Now he's the Foo
Foo
Fighters
Fighters, right?
frontman, right? But he was the drummer of Nirvana, and he like wouldn't show up to practice half the time. Like they felt he was the one not taking things seriously. So, and that annoyed Kurt Cobain, as I learned in the documentary from him, about his about their lives. They were not
Hmm.
friends of mine, but I think, you have a rock band can be great of three, but isn't there always, don't bands always fight and like always break up? I wonder, I mean, can you think of, I'll sit and think about it too, like a really successful, I'm sure like in an
Oh,
operating room,
oh,
there
I
has to
got
be
I
like
another
an
example.
anesthesiologist and a surgeon and, a nurse, probably important trio.
How about the police? There's a trio.
Yeah, there's a trio, but they also had a lot of fighting.
Yes, they did.
I think there's a lot of ego going on in that trio.
For sure.
Um, but let's say, I'm sure we'll think of it after the call. I'm sure we'll think of it after the call. I mean,
So,
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
no, I was just going to say, if is there anything personally that stands out for you with the number three?
Oh, well, so the whole reason, actually, thank you for reminding me that I wanted to talk with you about this today is the last time we spoke, which happened to be 3 weeks ago, actually, it's 3 weeks ago. I was on my way to reunite with my best friend from childhood, who I had not seen in 40 years. And I was so excited. It was almost like romantic. I was so excited. Like, I just thought, oh my gosh, my first love, as a friend. Um, and then she told me that this other woman who was also our friend was also coming to meet us. So it would be the three of us. And the interesting thing in that dynamic was that when we were children, I was friends with both of them, but separately. So they didn't actually really know each other. I was best friends with my friend, and then the other girl was a friend of mine. Okay. But then I moved. And when I moved, the two of them became best friends. So my the main my best friend had me as the best friend, and then this other girl's a best friend, and I was the one who left. And I did feel like I missed out on a lot of, growing up together and shared experiences. And I was a little bit threatened and a little bit annoyed that I was going to have to share my friend again. And I was nervous. I wasn't sure how it was going to play out. I've had experiences, as a kid, where as soon as you have the third kid, two kids are having a great time. And as soon as the third shows up, a lot of weird things can happen. So I wasn't so excited about it. And I did go in a little bit guarded. I definitely felt like I was sort of reverting back to childhood a little bit in terms of feeling slightly competitive, although it was completely not necessary because they are both such lovely people and they're adults. They're adults,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm an adult too. And so all of my kind of trepidation about this dynamic of three, girls together, now three women together, just completely fell away. Well, it didn't fall away right away. It took a day or so for me to realize these people love me. They're embracing me. Yes, we are very different. One of them makes quite a lot of money. Another one of us, makes less. Another one of us has kids. We all have, traveling together have these different kind of advantages and disadvantages. But in the end, I realized as an adult, seeking love, we had a great experience together, the three of us. But I was nervous going in, and that's when you and I first started talking
Mm-hmm.
about this group of three. And you said, "Tell me the story about," and I said, "I have to live it first. I have to live the story before I can tell you." So I'm telling you that it all went really well. I feel like I have new adult female friends that I'm so happy are back in my life. And it feels more like a team than like a competition. But I think that's because of the nature of like our personalities. Um, so yeah, so that's where I thought, let's talk about three.
Hmm. Well, I'm glad it worked out well. I know you had some hesitation there because it's sort of like the third wheel, even though it was all women,
Yeah,
right?
I didn't want to be the third wheel. I was
Right.
afraid I was going to be the third wheel. And as an only child, growing up an only child, there's like nothing more devastating than sort of being kicked back out into the loneliness, the lone child, basically. So
Gotcha.
they both have siblings, and I think that could actually mean why they are a bit more comfortable in this group of three. Like they didn't seem to be. Um, Now, of course, I didn't ask the one woman who came later. My best friend, I talked to her about this. I called her before I even showed up and was like, "I'm feeling anxious about our other friend coming, you know, and we talked about it, which was great. After 40 years, we can talk like best friends, which was so, wonderful. And she actually was who made me feel calmer about the whole thing. And then I just had to actually trust people to be kind, and they were.
I similar experience with like 40 years. I connected with somebody over the summer, and his mom and my mom were friends, and then we just lost track. And I was just walking down the street one day with my dog and looked up, and there he was. And that was last summer, and now we hang like every week or every couple of weeks. We have similar interests in music and things like that. Quick story about
Yeah,
the number three and
yeah.
the social dynamics. So it was 3 years ago. I went on a road trip from New York to Ocean City, Maryland, and it was me
Hmm.
and another guy and three women, and we're all friends. And we just took two separate vehicles, and we just head on down there. Memorial Day weekend, figured we'd do something different, and it was all good until one of the women was just becoming challenging. She was like, "It's my birthday in 3 weeks." There's three again. And, you guys need to recognize it. And we're like, okay, but that's, in 3 weeks. But it turned out that the two women bought the other one a frame and put pictures in it. And it just didn't go well. And we wound up leaving that person in Maryland because she said, "I'm not coming back." And,
Oh my gosh.
I'm not even kidding. And I'm saying, like, it's a Memorial Day. We have to get on the road. We have a 5-hour ride if we're lucky with traffic. We need to leave now. And we kept giving her, the countdown. We're leaving at 10:30. Now it's 10:45. You need to get in the car. And she decided not to come back. and she had somebody drive all the way from New York to pick her up. And to the day,
Wow.
she's not part of our circle anymore. It just didn't
Yeah, I
work
can
out.
imagine.
Yeah, so it just the dynamics didn't work. So that was it was 3 with the women, 5 in total with the 2 men, myself included.
Right.
But you would think it's yours worked out great. My situation didn't work out that well. So
Well,
like a
yeah. I
third
mean,
wheel.
it's fun. Yeah, it is. I mean, there's something to be said. Sometimes it's sort of how groups are broken up. So if you have 2 cars, they're 3 in one and 2 in another. The two, or you can even look at this, let's say if you took it to like a writing workshop or a seminar or a conference or something where you had people break up into groups. Um, when 2 people are working together, there's sort of this like intimacy in a way. Even if they debate, even if they debate on something, there's only going to be 2 points of view, and consensus isn't as complicated in that way. It's either there's 2 people, we don't agree, we agree to not agree, something like that, or 2 people, wow, we agree, that's amazing, But when you have a third person, a third point of view, the dynamic becomes more complicated because you can't form a team with 1 and 1 with 2 people. I mean, 2 people make a team, but it's 1 person and 1 person. Neither one has a team. It's the 2 of them together. As soon as you add a third person, you can have these, alliances made, or I agree with him, I don't agree with her.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you agree with me? Before, and it becomes a mishmash almost of dialogue. I think, yeah. So it's in social dynamics, a third person, a third element. It can be an animal. It could be like you brought your dog, or you brought your baby, or you brought, your parent, and then suddenly what was going to be a date, between 2 people becomes something else. So there's this the build using it as a tactic is always interesting. I mean, you can use it like poetically or to sort of build momentum in the point you're trying to make. You can't really have an and or. In a list of 3 is usually, where people are starting to feel that they're able to describe something really well. When you have the three words describing it. But yeah, I think it just holds up. It seems to just be a more stable structure, although it also, in a social way, creates instability in its own way.
Isn't it interesting that you look at 2 and you could have a couple and they can say, we're a team. And that's all good. But
Mm-hmm.
you don't have that balance. That's the word I'm looking for. Balance. But
Yeah.
interestingly, in that the number 3 is an odd number, but you get balance
Mm-hmm.
from it when you add it into the mix, whether it's everything that we're talking about here, whether it's in comedy, in communication, in storytelling. It works. It
Well, and
works.
also, I mean, of course, you have like the Holy Trinity, right?
And then
The
there's
Father,
that.
the Son, the Holy Ghost. It's clearly has its roots in, you know, thousands of years. I just think it's one of those things that's been in existence for as long as people have been telling stories, really.
Yeah.
And it's got to be based on some kind of foundation feeling. Like the pyramid is a triangular; it's 3. I, you know, like we were saying at the beginning, a 2-legged table would have to have some pretty interesting design. I mean, you could have an end table, right? An end table is a 2-legged table, but the 2 legs are belled at the bottom, to create a kind of stability that wouldn't be there otherwise.
Right.
So it's adapted. So, but ultimately, if you have 3 sticks, you could create a table.
This runs deeper than we probably even realize, especially when you were going to the Holy Trinity and the pyramids and all of that. And there, but what is that? That's more backing for the number 3 being
Right.
impactful in our communication. Um,
Yeah.
I always knew it needed to be that, but I never knew why. And you bring up some wonderful points that now I have a view of it. I remember this is going back, let's see, 25 years. I had a general manager in radio, and she was the one that always pushed the rule of thirds. And, I understood it. I agree with it, that it sounds better on air, but never really delved deeper into why that actually works. But it works. It works. This is just a piece of realization that you bring to the forefront. And certainly if somebody was doing something, a story, some type of communication, whatever it might be, you would probably introduce the rule of thirds. It needs to be there. How do we find you, Michelle?
Yeah, I have a website which is pretty comprehensive about the work that I do, which is www.michellecutler.com, which is MICHELLECUTLER. And there's a contact form there. And then, of course, I have my socials where you can reach me on Instagram or Facebook, LinkedIn. I have a very uninvolved Blue Sky account and a very uninvolved TikTok account. I haven't really figured out what to do with those, if I want to even do anything with those, but I'm best to find through my website.
I love the way you put that, uninvolved. It's real. It's honest.
So I set them up. I don't really feel like I'm getting much out of it. Like I'm not really interested. So I'm not really sure why, but I'm giving it a chance. And
it's work. And you're certainly locatable in other places. So that's all good. It is always wonderful talking with you. Epiphany for me on 3 and so much more. And we don't realize how important our communication is. That's why we're talking about it today. And you help people with that. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. It's always a good time to talk to you.
Same. We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Hi, this is Terry Crews, actor, former football player, game show host, father of 5, and all-around big dude. I'm also an expert on drama. I know all kinds of drama. There's the good kind that comes with having a house full of kids. There's the bad kind like season-ending injuries. There's the necessary kind like having an agent in Hollywood. And there's silly drama like the drama around my percolating pectorals. And then there's the drama you can skip.
Skip the drama that comes with not having your high school diploma or equivalency. Find free adult education classes near you and finish your high school diploma. Visit finishyourdiploma.org.
Or text diploma to 97779. Message and data rates may apply. Reply STOP to opt out. That's diploma to 97779. And leave the drama to actors like me.
Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.